Good evening. I'm David Rothenberg, and I've been joined by Oskar Eustis, who's the artistic director of the Public Theater. We're kicking off a week-long Fortune Society Arts Festival. Fortune has enjoyed a rewarding relationship with the Public Theater for several years. We've been one of the designated community groups as part of the Public Works, which is sponsored by the Public Theater, which brings theater programs to Fortune as well as plays. And Oscar, I've sat in on many of the acting classes that at Fortune, and I'm increasingly aware of the healing component that the arts provides. And we have, in addition to acting classes, we have music, drawing, and writing. And it gives people a voice. Recently, I saw a documentary. Viola Davis said in this documentary about August Wilson, her quote was, "When people are denied their voice, there's a danger that they'll implode." And I thought that was fascinating. But at the Public, I know your mission is to present plays, but I also suspect that you see the theater as an agent for social change in the plays that you produce and how you produce them. But there's a healing component for the audience and for the artist. So I'm wondering if how you approach that or how you see healing as part of the arts for the participant and for the audience.
Yeah. I mean, mostly, David, I completely agree that healing is a huge part of what happens in a theater, but it doesn't necessarily happen simply because you're aiming at healing. I think it happens just by the act of aiming at making a piece of theater or aiming at acting. And that, there's a couple of different points about that seem in opposition to each other, but actually I think are the same thing. And the one is that you get a chance to express yourself. You get a chance to bring your whole being, your body, yourself is the instrument in theater. It's not a violin or a piano. It's you are the instrument.
Yeah.
And you get to bring that into the spotlight and speak. But you also get to try on being other people. You get to try other characters on for size. And we know this, Aristotle says this beautiful thing that learning, imitation is the earliest and most pleasurable form of learning. And when we're kids, we play at being other people. And for grown-ups, it serves the same need. By imagining yourself as someone else, you're expanding your own sense of what's possible for you. And when you play a king, you realize, oh, a king is just like me with a different set of clothes on. But he's not a completely different person. And so that process of imagining yourself bigger is, I think, a huge part of what's healing about the theater.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that we go into a classroom and say we're going to heal you. I think that the end result, at Fortune Society, which is one of the community groups in which Public Works participates, we have groups that the people that are in the acting classes also participate in anger management and drug prevention, relapse prevention. And it's occurred to me that's all about undoing the past and to the negative things in their life. But when you remove the time consumption and the emotional commitment to negative past, that it's exciting and almost essential to replace it with things that give you pride and acceptance. And I don't think it's exclusively in the arts, but to watch people for the first time, we do a play called The Castle for people who are formerly incarcerated telling their story. And there's a Q&A afterwards, and the questions are pretty predictable. And one night this man said, "You've all had very negative past, and it's fascinating that you've used it to tell your past, to tell your stories. How does it feel to get applause?" And the cast, which is always very glib with a response, Victor Rojas turned to me and said, "Boy, that's a tough one, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, Victor, what is it?" And he said, "The only time I ever got attention in my life was when I was arrested or was when in court. And suddenly I'm telling the worst things that I ever did, and people are applauding me. And how does that make you feel?" That's a very exciting component. Now, I don't think we're suggesting that everybody take an acting class suddenly become an actor, but it's the process itself. But for
So
somebody
beautiful,
who
David.
doesn't have our past, for actors who come to you, do you find that I don't think you don't sit and probe them, but do you, in your interaction socially with people, do you recognize that the acting experience enriches a person?
Oh, there's no question, David. It's both the acting itself enriches them, but also to be good at it, you have to keep expanding who you are. You have to keep expanding the possibilities. So good actors are always curious. They always want to know more about the world and how it works, because acting is actually a way of mastering the world. It's a way of saying, I can see what's happening in the world, and now I can play it back to the world. Just like the men you were talking about, by being able to tell their story, it's a way of mastering their story. Their story isn't in charge of them, they're in charge of the story. They can sit outside of it to a certain extent and treat it as a story, which means they can get bigger than that story. And,
Is
I
that
think
why
that's,
Shakespeare is so important?
oh, there's no
Does he,
question.
how does he give that in the characters in the plays?
Well, he does it, first of all, through just unmastered complexity of character. His characters are so deep and truthful and real. He's not capable of writing a one-dimensional character. But there's something else that I think is really key to that, David, which is the language. Because Shakespeare took the common language of the people and he elevated it by turning it into verse. And iambic pentameter, which is the verse form he used, is as close to the natural rhythm of speech in English as any verse form, but it's still verse. And by elevating that language, he's actually ennobling the language and he's ennobling the people who speak the language. So the people are not simply naturalistic representations of themselves, they're better spoken, they're bigger, they're more beautiful, they're more articulate. And being able to master that, it elevates not only who you are, but who the people you're playing are, which is, by the way, exactly what hip hop artists do. They take the language of the streets and they turn it into verse, and by turning it into verse, they elevate it.
Let's bring it to contemporary. There's a fellow that's in our play who said in prison he had never seen a play, uh, and he started reading Arthur Miller. And he said he could identify with the emotions of the characters in there, and that was his starting point for reconceiving what his life could be. I found that a very exciting realization that he shared with me.
It's so
Uh,
beautiful.
he particularly talked about the Crucible and A View from the Bridge.
Yeah, yeah,
Isn't
beautiful.
that interesting? That
It's
that
fantastic.
I know sometimes when I go to when I meet people, I say that's right out of Romeo and Juliet, thwarted love. It's very exciting that the theater, when it's at its best, mirrors us, doesn't it?
That's right. Absolutely. And and yet it mirrors us, but it's not simply a direct mirror. It also changes things enough that you can get perspective on it. At the same time, you're identifying with it. And your friend, he's identifying with John Proctor because John Proctor has sinned in the crucible, that character. He has fallen from grace. He has hurt somebody he loves. He lies in order to try to save somebody he loves. And finally, he realizes he can't lie anymore even if the cost is death. He actually has to say, this is my name. It's the only name I have, and I can't besmirch it by lying. And to watch somebody go through that process is so powerful because it's also a challenge to us. Can we actually find that line and say, I am not going to conceal or lie about who I am. I'm going to maintain that no matter what the consequences.
You make me want to rush to see a play. I'm hungry. I'm doing cold turkey, not having been to the theater. When a play is in, when before you go into production, do you sit down with well, if the playwright's alive, but with the director and some of the actors, and explore the sub-level emotions? And
Absolutely. It's, all of the talk that we do about plays, it boils down to two simple questions. Why should we care about this story? And once we figured that out, how do we make the audience care about it? And that's all about teasing out what are the problems that are like us, what are the drama, what are the conflicts in the play that are like the conflicts we have in life. How can we make that read to an audience when we're doing it? How can we bring this play close to us? And by bringing it close to us, hopefully it brings it close to the audience as well. And that's, when we're talking to the playwright, when I'm talking to the director, when I'm talking to the actors, that's always the goal of every conversation.
Yeah. I remember years ago, I'm sure you're familiar with it. In San Quentin, there was the acting troupe, a guy named Rick Clucci.
Of course, I knew Rick. Yeah.
And he told me that the most the play that inmates responded to most was Waiting for Godot, which baffled at that. Now, Waiting for Godot is not considered so complex, but when it was first done, critics were puzzled by it. But
Right.
what was it about it that men that were incarcerated saw in Godot? Was it the waiting?
It's so interesting because I actually saw Rick's production of Waiting for
Did
Godot
you?
with prisoners, which were people who were held and incarcerated, and it was fantastic. It's partly that the waiting, the sense of not being able to move on with your life, but it's also the uncertainty about when are things ever going to change? When is Godot ever going to show up? These two guys don't know when that's ever going to, and they have to somehow live with not knowing, and they have to fill the time while they're not knowing. And boy, did I feel like that cast understood on a level I'd never seen before.
The play is really extraordinary because, well, it baffled Broadway and I saw the original production, Burt Moore, P.G. Marshall.
Wow.
I was as confused as everyone. And then when I was working with the Free Southern Theater, and they were going into the fields with people in the South, Black audiences, and the whole purpose of it was to have an integrated cast. They said that Godot was so popular and so received. And then I saw a production at the Classic Theater of Harlem where they flooded around. They were on a rooftop, and it was New Orleans right after Katrina.
Oh, wow.
And that wonderful actor from The Wire, Wendell Pierce.
Wendell Pierce, yeah.
It was extraordinary. And I thought, what was this? Why was I perplexed about this? It is so clear that they are waiting for something that may never happen in their lives.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Exactly right. Exactly right, David. Jeez.
Isn't that exciting when the theater can do that?
It's incredibly exciting. Not all of us, like you, went from the theater into just complete social justice work, but all of us understand why you did it, David.
Because I never left the theater.
Exactly. You're still doing it at the castle.
Oscar, we sit at meetings, and sometimes I would poke Sam Rivera or Stanley Richards, and I said, it's going too long. We're losing the audience. And I remember Sam said to me, this isn't theater. And I said, everything is theater. There is something about commanding the attention of the people. It may not be production, but if you want to be successful at a community meeting, you have to embrace the emotional content has to be relevant to the people that are sitting there.
And see, David, you're just repeating the thing that I said. When you're talking, you have to know why you care about it, and you have to convince the audience that it's worth them caring about. And that's not just theater, that's communication in life. That's what we always have to do. We have to express what matters to us in a way that somebody else can connect to it.
How do you maintain your passion? Because that's what this is all about, isn't it? Is that when I walk into a theater, I sometimes I see critics and I knew critics, and they always look like they were waiting for something terrible to happen. I always go in praying that I'm going to be exhilarated. That I saw a movie last week. It was a film adaptation of a play, The Father. Anthony Hopkins' performance. I went into a movie theater. Of course, no one was there but me. But I was elevated emotionally. I couldn't believe how. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't, but I can't wait to.
It's a landmark performance of an actor finding the emotional content. It's a man with Alzheimer's. If you ever saw, the play was with Frank Langella.
Right,
I think I'm quite good, but it's seeing an artist dig in And of course, Hopkins is an extraordinary actor to begin with.
But isn't that thrilling?
Yeah, it is. What is, before we lose you, this is gonna be like a Rona Barrett question. What was, in your theater going, were there moments that were so important, so valuable that they were almost life-changing, that you connected so strongly?
You know, I got to say there were many moments
Yes,
like
I'm
that,
sure.
David, and I
But,
still have them. The first one was when I was 5 years old, and at the
oh,
community theater in Rochester, Minnesota, when I grew up, they were doing West Side Story. And the first gang rumble happened.
oh,
And then the back of the theater opened up, and a real police car drove into the middle of the stage with policemen in it who jumped out, and I was gone. And I literally think I have not wanted to do anything but theater ever since.
ever since.
And it's that blurring of the line between what's real and what's theater. And of course, you know, you and I know that the theater is real, just in a different way. But
Well,
I feel
the
so
play
lucky to be
Fortune in
able to.
Men's Eyes changed my life. When I read it, I was devastated by the content, not realizing it was the playwright's experience, that he wrote it in a catharsis. Did I ever think that it would reroute my life? But from the stage, the content of the play sent me to Rikers to see it, shocked by the images that the play was reflecting. And the Fortune Society literally grew from the stage at the Actors Playhouse after discussions with the audience, when men in the audience who had done time introducing themselves. That's
Oh,
passion. That's the theater when it scrubs and that's probably why All About Eve is my favorite movie, because about the theater and about the backstage Oscar, we could probably do this for a day and a half,
you could.
but thank you so much.
Well, David, thank you. This was really fun. But what I really want to thank you for is you are an exemplar of what a human being should be. And the fact that you came from a professional theater background to create the organization that you created is so inspiring and moving to me. I just, every day, I'm glad you're around.
Thank you. And this half hour has been a healing experience for me. Thank you, Oskar Eustis from the Public Theater.
Thank you very
ER,
much.
Theater ER. Thank you.